Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for joining us this evening for a journey into wetlands and wetland restorations with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. My name is Richard Klafki, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this talk for NatureTalk tonight. I'm part of the BC team of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and I lead our work in the Canadian Rockies program area in southeastern British Columbia. Tonight, I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Tanaka and the Secwepemc nations, more specifically the Akiskanook and the Shuswap Band here near Invermere, British Columbia. As we're coming here together tonight from many different places, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the place from which you join us and our collective responsibility for the stewardship of the land in which we work. Wetland restoration is one of my new favorite emerging topics because we're doing a lot of it recently. And I'm excited to be sharing this next hour with two fabulous wetland conservation experts, Robin Annschild and Ren Ferguson. We will start with presentations from each of us, taking you through the full scope of wetland restoration. I'll kick things off with a look at how the current state of wetlands are in British Columbia in an overview, general view, and dig into why the restoration of very many of these projects are such an important and hopeful thing to do. Robin will describe some of the work she's been working with NCC across BC, from the Lower Mainland, Vancouver Island, and to the Kootenays. Ren will show us the proof of the benefits of work through her monitoring programs across very many of our NCC projects and other programs she's worked on. I encourage you to submit questions during any time, as we will have a Q&A portion at the end, and we'll take up as many of those questions as we can before our time runs out tonight. Now I'd like to introduce you to our two special guests. Robin Annschild is the Rewilding Water and Earth. She's a British Columbia-based consulting company specializing in stream, wetland, and floodplain restoration design and construction. Robin studied biology at McGill University and developed a conservation planning and restoration project management skills as the conservation director of a small land trust on Salt Spring Island before jumping into the muddy world of wetland restoration full-time in 2014. Robin has designed and built over 350 wetland on more than 50 project sites across BC. I've had the pleasure of working with Robin to restore at least three wetlands, Robin, in the Kootenays. She's also helped the Nature Conservancy of Canada reconstruct 2 wetland areas on Vancouver Island, which you will hear more from her tonight. Welcome, Robin. It's great to see you tonight. The little mute button.
There we go. We always have to have a little technical glitch. It is great to be here. Thank you, Richard. And it's really nice to see you too.
Great. And I'm also really excited to introduce Ren Ferguson. I haven't really had the pleasure of working with Ren directly, but she's worked with NCC in the Lower Mainland, and I'm happy that she's here tonight. Ren's lifelong passion for birds has led her to become a field ornithologist and a consultant specializing in avian surveys. She works with several conservation nonprofits and the provincial government to record, protect, and mitigate threats to birds and the ecosystems that we rely on. Like Robin, Ren also lives on Salt Spring Island. Freaky coincidence, I know, where she is the project lead for the Western Screech Owl Stewardship Project there. As we will hear later, Ren has documented the rapid transformation that occurs after wetland reconstruction at several sites, including NCC's Chase Woods Wetland Restoration Project on Vancouver Island, where she did surveys before and after the restoration work that we undertook there. Hello, Ren.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Richard. Hi, Robin. I'm really excited to be here and to share in a photographic journey what I experienced in a wetland restoration project. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you both for being part of tonight's Nature Talk tonight. Now we're off to an interesting start. We're going to start with a quick poll. The poll, we're going to have a question. So the poll question, you should see a poll question pop up on your screen. What do you know about wetlands within Canada and all over the globe? As you're answering the poll question, keep in mind that wetlands include swamps, bogs, and fens. There is a wide variety of choices here. Give you a couple more seconds to tune in. I think we're good there. Aha. So the correct answer to the poll is 6% of the Earth is considered wetland. Not oceans, maybe that's why people pick so high. 25% are within Canada, which is why it's important for the Nature Conservancy of Canada and others to take care of this type of wetland ecosystems. So that's amazing that Canada represents such a large area that has freshwater wetlands. Well, we have lots to talk about when it comes to wetlands, so let's get started. I'm going to share my presentation first, and then we'll follow with Robin and then Ren. So I will start. And if anyone can let me know if the Helping Hand for Wetlands slide is up. I just need to share this. That's why. Here we go. Okay. So I just need this. Okay, so helping hand for wetlands. So we'd like to talk about that wetlands cover approximately 5% of the landmass in British Columbia. Natural wetlands are very important for all our ecosystems, and that over 350 to 500 species of plants and animals rely on wetlands for a portion of their life. That's 80% of all of BC's wildlife species. And as you can see here, there's everything from great blue herons, there's a beaver dam on the left, there's mallards, there's amphibians, nesting ducks use wetlands, and even ungulates and other terrestrial species. So they play an important role. Why are they so important? Well, they provide excellent wildlife habitat for all the species that we just saw on that last slide. And you see this acronym SAR, species at risk. There's very many species at risk that really rely on wetlands, and they're really important to their life cycle. Wetlands provide ecosystem services, agriculture, forage, because they provide the water and to sustain plants. They mitigate flooding. They are like nature's sponge. And when there's flooding events, they prevent sedimentation because they absorb the runoff from extreme events. They improve water quality as they filter the water through their systems and provide clean water for people and wildlife. They're also good at climate change mitigation. They provide CO2 sequestration, uptake is what I like to say. So they're really important for absorbing carbon into the system and good for climate change. During drought, they store that water, that when the water levels recede, they provide water for everything from agriculture to wildlife, and that's really important during dry times. They also provide recreation, education, and science services. I mean, everybody loves to go fishing in the wetlands and stuff like that. So, I mean, they're really important even for people. And all of this saves money through infrastructure. You don't necessarily need to create, dams and stuff like that. It's like wetlands are their natural forms of water storage. Oh, I think I slid through. So why is it important that NCC and everyone that's stewarding wetlands are working on wetlands? More than 60% of natural wetlands have been lost in southern BC. In the lower mainland, 60 to 70% of the wetlands have been lost, and it's most evident in the South Okanagan with up to 85% lost. And this was contributed to historic drainage and diking over the years, and thinking that a little bit here and a little bit there is not a big deal, but over the years, as you can see in this map, there's southern BC has lost a lot of its wetlands over the last 100 years. So here's some of the species at risk that really rely on these wetlands. In the top left is the northern leopard frog, and their last extant natural population is in the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area. And they are working with the Wilder Institute and the Calgary Zoo to establish subpopulations away from that natural population so that if something catastrophic happened, that they can exist in the wild. West Slope cutthroat trout, of course, fish, bull trout, burbot, they're all really important species that rely on wetlands. And of course, things like western toads that are sort of terrestrial and aquatic. Now you see American badger here and you think, well, badgers, what do they have to do with wetlands? But a lot of the restoration work that the Nature Conservancy Canada has undertaken involves moving soil. And if you move soil out of an area and you provide it rough and loose, ground squirrels move in, and then who moves in afterwards but the American badger to feed on them. And the American badger is an endangered species in British Columbia. So what does this mean to Nature Conservancy Canada? The conservation value of wetlands are super important. a lot of the conservation properties we acquire were wetlands in the past. They maybe not be functioning riparian or agricultural areas anymore. And so we recognize that, wetlands, like you saw in some of the first photos, aren't as natural and pristine as they were or could be, but there is a way to restore these wetlands, and that's what we want to talk a bit about tonight. They're very resilient. A lot of the species that occurred there are still in the soil waiting to be restored. So there's many opportunities to reverse this habitat loss across southern British Columbia through Nature Conservancy Canada's work. Here's a property in the East Kootenay region. Just making sure the little video slide plays. This is we call Cherry Meadows. These wetlands here were man-made and constructed out of an old derelict hayfield. And this is just amazing that there used to be wetlands here, and we were able to restore that a few years ago, and beavers have moved in and are starting to restore the natural system back the way it used to be. Here's a photo that I took with an iPhone that actually worked underwater, and you can see that many of the aquatic species that were there, we never planted a lot of these species, they have recolonized the area. There's cattails and like aquatic vegetation, milfoils and stuff that have reinvaded, recolonized the wetland that was created there. It's very exciting. So as I mentioned earlier, northern leopard frogs, they're the last natural population in British Columbia is in Creston, and the Wilder Institute and the Calgary Zoo has partnered with us to be able to release tadpoles of northern leopard frogs on this Cherry Meadows property. And so it's pretty exciting that they deemed that this restoration work was important enough and valuable enough to be one of the most ideal sites to reintroduce northern leopard frogs in the East Kootenay region. Our next emerging project is it's Marion Creek Restoration Area. It's west of Columbia Lake. It's part of an old ranch that was drained and ditched. And in the foreground, you can see all these shrubs. And that was a natural occurring beaver pond complex. And due to the ditching down the sides and draining the wetland, it's too wet to be good for agriculture or grassy, but it's not wet enough to be a wetland. And so we're working with the local rancher that grazes on the property, and the Columbia Headwaters Aquatic Restoration Strategy Shokwepa group, and of course we're working with Robin Annschild and rewilding. And here's Miranda Cross and Robin surveying some of the stream work, the drainage ditch to the left of them there. And we're very excited to be working with Robin. And I want to introduce Robin because I'd like to talk about how she's going to be presenting on her work. I'm just going to close here. Welcome, Robin.
Thanks, Richard. It's really nice to be here. And thanks to everybody for joining us. It's turning into that time of year where it's nice to be inside in the evening, nice and warm, and it's nice to be able to talk about wetlands. And I'm on Galliano Island this evening. We're expecting very, very heavy rain. And one of the really nice things about doing wetland restoration is you always look forward to the rain to see how your wetlands are going to fill up. So shall I jump in with my presentation?
I think that would be perfect.
Okay. Now let me see. I get the award for having the first blooper here tonight. So let me see if I can share my screen. There we go. Okay, well, thank you, Richard, for giving us an overview of the state of wetlands across BC. And I'm going to zoom us in to southeastern Vancouver Island. We are standing on top of Mount Zuhalem here, looking down at the incredibly beautiful and ecologically valuable Cowichan Estuary. And this is one of Nature Conservancy of Canada's conservation lands on Southeast Vancouver Island. And we did a wetland restoration on a small part of this of this property, but the bulk of the property actually protects portions of Mount Zuhalem, so coastal Douglas fir ecosystem, Gary Oaks, upland, dry ecosystems with multiple species at risk. And down in the valley here, there's this tiny little triangle, and there you can see the heavy equipment working. We are restoring wetlands down in this little triangle, down in this low area. Now, I want you to notice this road here. This is Knipson Road, and look at how wet it is here on the estuary side of the road and how dry it is up here. And I'm going to tell you more about this as we go through these images. And what I want to share with you is the process that we go through when we design and then implement a restoration project. And so here's a map for those of you who like maps. There's the Chase Woods property outlined in black, and it adjoins the Mount Zuhalem protected area. And there's Quamachin Lake and Somnos Lake and the beautiful Cowichan Estuary down here. And we're going to zoom in a little bit more. Here's the property, and down in the southwest corner of the property, there's an area of a low area that formerly was a reed canary dominated field. It was not a very good field. It was always really too wet to farm. And NCC wanted to restore the area. Now, look down here on the map. This is interesting. Knipson Road. And look at this. There's a tide gate right here. So one of the things we were curious about as we looked at this property is, hey, wait a second. Here's this road. But when there's a tide gate, you think, well, really, this is potentially a dike. It looks like it's probably functioning as a dike, which means that when the tide comes up, the tide can go up through this creek. And then when it comes down, or sorry, when it comes up, it's blocked by the gate that closes. And when it comes down, the tide is dropping, water can flow out from the creek through the road and into the estuary. And so one of the questions we had is, well, now, wait a minute, if this Knipson Road was not here, potentially this 32-hectare area was historically part of the estuary, which is important because estuaries are some of the most productive wetland habitats we have. Very, very important for carbon storage, important for juvenile fish, rearing habitat, very important for salmon. So this was one of the questions that we had. And the technique that we used to look at this question was we used a drone. And what you're looking at here is a close-up of the area that we restored. And this is a flight path for the drone. And every dot here represents a photo that the drone took. And then we're able to use software to stitch these images together, which allows us either to create what we call an ortho image, which is a high resolution image, just looking down at the ground, like you would look at Google Earth, but very much higher resolution. But additionally, it allows us to create what's called a digital elevation model. So this is a digital elevation model of that same area. The planned restoration area is up in here. There's Mount Zuhalem, and here's Knipson Road, and here's the access road to some houses here on private property and on the Nature Conservancy's land. And so what we can do with these tools, which is really fascinating, is you can imagine almost having like a little digital eraser, and you use the eraser to erase the contours that represent the road. And then we said, well, what if we set the elevation, we set low tide as the starting elevation, and then we set high tide as the ending elevation, and we run a little model, a little video that shows us what is going to happen as the tide comes up if you were to scrub out those roads. And what you can see is that entire area historically before Knipson Road was there was flooded. So I think this is really fascinating because I always like to look at the larger level landscape context of a site. And so the long-term restoration for this site would be to restore connectivity to the estuary. And in doing that, you'd be able to add 32 hectares back to the estuary. And estuaries that could be another whole webinar about estuaries, their value, and what a small area they represent across the landscape. So anyway, that's a long-term project. But in the meantime, we were looking at this little triangle right here, which had been converted to a hay field. And so the process that we go through is looking at it and trying to understand what's the history of disturbance? So imagine just like if you go to see a doctor or you go to the hospital, you're going to be asked, well, tell me about your health history. What's happened to you in your life? What are some of the injuries you've had? Have you had surgeries? And so we look at an area and we go, well, what's the history of change and disturbance on this landscape that's brought it to be what it is today? And what actions might we be able to take to bring it back to a healthy and productive ecosystem? And so one of the things that happened down here is a structure was built, and this structure was built right where the stream used to come out into the floodplain here. And you can see here's the building right here, looking at it from the south, and the stream was put into this deep ditch and given a very straight and direct path out and away from the land as a way of making the land more productive for agriculture. And this is the second stream, and this is me standing in the ditch in December. It was cold. I didn't stay in the ditch very long. It was cold, but it's just to illustrate for you the depth of the ditch. And that ditch is removing surface water and lowering the elevation of groundwater on the project site. Now, what we're looking to is, okay, that those ditches are draining the site. So how could we bring the site back to have the kind of hydrological regime that would allow it to have a wetland on it again? And one of the things we found now, we just had Halloween yesterday. You might have seen some ghosts in your neighborhood. Well, this right here is the ghost of a creek. This is a remnant channel, a remnant piece of the channel of creek number 2, which was the one I was standing in. And it's interesting to see when you measure this on the ground, this is 10 to 12 meters wide, way, way, way wider than those ditches I was standing in, which are in that order of 2 to 3 meters wide. And this is only 10 centimeters deep compared to that ditch I showed you, which, the water was 85 centimeters deep. So one thing that was fascinating about this site, and I don't know how the quality might not be great here, but it is very rare to find historical photographs of a site. This is a historical photograph of our site. I found it in this book called Cowichan, A History in Photographs. And I think this photograph was taken in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And at this time, the conversion of this from estuary to grazing land or farmland had just begun. It's hard to see probably in the webinar, but there's a fence right here, and there's a lot of moisture in here, a lot of water, standing water. So really interesting to have these historical references telling us what the site used to be. And here's another example. This is a historical air photo from the 1940s. You can see our creeks here. Look at how wiggly they are, very, very wiggly across the landscape. But there's already some ditches in here. There's some drainage that's occurred. And so again, this is one of the tools we use. We look at these historical air photos, and we use the air photos to trace what the original path of the stream was, and then successively over the decades, the location of drainage ditches that were used to gradually drain the area. So we're not trying to put this back to what it was historically. Oftentimes we can't. There may be infrastructure, things have changed on the landscape. But what we're looking to do is to add that complexity back and to really extend and expand on the habitat that is there now, because it was removed. So it's been lost, right? So we want to restore that. So here in this case, this is a sketch that I made of, okay, we've got this building right where the stream used to go. We're not going to put the stream right through the building. That building was going to be preserved on the site. And so we imagined a path for the stream that would be quite wiggly, that would be long, much longer than the path of the ditch. This is the ditch right here. You can see it coming along, and that would add a lot of habitat, a lot of length, linear meters of stream equals, area of habitat. So there was our concept. And here we are now, we're building that stream, and you can see the bulldozer here is working. It is stripping the reed canary, which is this non-native plant that's been mowed here. It is stripping it and pushing it back to the side. This excavator here is building wetland basins. Here's one that's complete, and where we can, we're transplanting the native sedges. We're saving existing native shrubs. And you can see here, we're shaping some basins. They're beginning to fill with water. We're adding coarse woody debris, very important for structure and for perches, for birds, wildlife habitat. And one of the things that was tricky about this site, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is a driveway here that comes down to the building. And we were able to create another temporary access during construction here, but we really had our accesses way on this side. And so we didn't have a choice. We had to work from the bottom of the picture back. And because that stream was kind of meandering and wiggling through it, we ended up having to build the stream in a whole bunch of different sections and then connect the sections together as we went. So you can see here, there's a section of stream taking shape. We kind of lined it with sedges and rushes here that we transplanted. So there's a section of stream taking shape there, and it's taking shape here. And then we're going to connect all these pieces together as we work our way out. Now, here's a before and after. This is the site that had been mowed. The reed cannery was mowed before we started moving soil. And here it is with the excavation complete. Now, the water is starting to work its way through the stream. You can see it's very turbid, but that's okay because it's very flat. Very, very little change in elevation here. And the water, this turbidity is going to settle out as it works its way through multiple wetland pools. These ones have filled from groundwater. That's why the water is clearer there. And now going back to the digital elevation model I showed you earlier that we were using to create that model, we also created one after excavation. And you can see the difference, from my just a little line sketch. This is the actual path of the stream. And you see the complexity of it, how much edge there is, how many different little nooks and crannies there are in there, the extent of the water compared to that line that I had traced. And this is based on actually measuring the elevation, again, using the drone so that we can figure out what part would be flooded. And the part that's going to be flooded from the stream itself is the area that's outlined in blue. And here we are, excavation is complete, but of course it's very early days. There's no vegetation yet. And, but you can see that the stream is full of water and the water is starting to clear up. It's starting to settle out. And here's some of the basins filling up with water. And then I'll leave you with this is another before and after photo. Actually, this photo down below was taken by Ren. And when I saw this photo, I thought, oh, wait a minute, I think I have a before picture that would match up pretty well with this one. So I was pretty pleased with this matchup. Now, this photograph was taken in the wintertime at high tide. So we mentioned the tide gate. When the tide is high, of course, the stream water can't evacuate because the tide is blocking the tide gate. And so you get these very high, much higher water. And this leads into Ren's presentation, who is going to take you on the journey of what happened when the heavy equipment and I withdrew and the vegetation and the wildlife started to move in.
Thanks very much, Robin. That was just awesome. And thanks to Richard as well. I'm going to share my screen now. And start my presentation. So I had the pleasure, Robin and Richard do all the work, and I come in afterwards and get to experience the changes directly. So my first visit to Chase Woods was in December of 2017, prior to wetland construction. You can see that the reed canary grass is very dense, and there's scattered willow shrubs throughout. By January 2018, we'd had a really heavy snow on the coast, and so the reed canary grass was completely flattened. In places, there were some small pockets of standing water, but the main standing water at this point, before the restoration project happened, was in the ditch, especially that ditch that you saw Robin standing in. And the only waterfowl I ever experienced being there was a couple of Canada geese and mallards that came and checked that out, but only during the high water of the winter. By May 2018, there were a couple of wetland-related songbirds that did nest in the area. This is a poor photograph of a marsh wren, and also common yellowthroat nested in the area. So there was enough moisture and enough kinds of vegetation that these birds were attracted to. Other songbirds, such as the song sparrow and yellow warbler and orange crown warbler, also were present in the shrub areas and the field edges. By June 2018, this is just prior to construction, and literally the reed canary grass was 8 feet tall in places. This was not an easy place to survey for birds, but actually there wasn't a whole lot of bird activity. As you can imagine, this is a pretty monoculture, not a lot of diversity here that would attract wildlife. I was really happy to see the construction begin, and the reed canary grass gets stripped away and starting to see some water. So my first winter visit in 2018 and 2019 after construction, you can see as Robin was saying, that when the tide gates closed, the water was fairly high at times. And you can see these are purple martin nest boxes that we had installed. The reflections were really beautiful that morning. In March, I began to see waterfowl coming into the wetland. This was really a big rowdy group of 45 mallard, and they were just having an awesome time in the new wetland. Canada geese and mallard, they spend time loafing on the mounds and the coarse woody debris that Robin and the crew established in the wetland. The most exciting new occurrence was this pair of wood ducks. They arrived in April, and this photograph shows them busy in courtship display. They did mate later that day, and they did raise young. This is a video showing them resting and preening after later on that day with the mallards coming through. This next video shows them foraging and swimming about. It was really neat. I'd be there at dawn and I would witness the female fly in from the forest where she would be incubating her eggs inside the cavity of a nest tree. And then she'd feed for a while, preen, and then fly back to continue incubating. It was quite exciting to see her fuzzy young later too. So barn swallows nested in that workshop that Robin showed you. It's important to remember that wetlands are somewhat of an insect nursery, and the adult barn swallows would fly back and forth all day, catching insects over the wetland and delivering them to their very hungry nestlings, as you can see in this photograph. The barn swallows grew quickly, and by late August, I witnessed an insect hatch off the wetland. Not sure what the insects were, but there were 40 plus barn swallows foraging right over the wetland. So it was very, very nice to see them eating well in preparation for their summer migration. Other aerial insectivore is what we call birds that feed on insects in the air. These are tree swallows that nested in the purple martin box. Beautiful violet green swallows nested as well. And after sundown, the bats would take over and they would start feeding over the wetland. Red-breasted sapsuckers nested in a maple just up from the wetland, and they'd come into the willow trees and make these sap wells. So they visited quite often. birds weren't the only wildlife that showed up after the wetland was built. This is a Purpurtius duskywing, a species at risk associated with Gary oak habitat that occurs upland on the same reserve. And they came in quite often and frequented the edges of the wetland. Red-legged frogs also showed up, and it's another species at risk. Many species of dragonflies appeared. This one is a 4-spotted skimmer, absolutely gorgeous dragonfly. And next, here is a common whitetail. Later that season, a species at risk plant showed up, and it was blooming all over the place in the wetland. I'm like, geez, what is this? I discovered it was Vancouver Island beggar ticks, and it established itself in the wetland, and here it's being visited by a yellow-faced bumblebee, and here by a woodland skipper. I got in touch with the folks at NCC and I said, did you guys plant these beggar ticks? And they said, no. So my theory is that the seeds from this plant made their way to our wetland from traveling on ducks' feathers from Somenos Marsh, where another established population of this plant lives. By the second winter, now we're into 2020, I was really amazed at how many overwintering waterfowl found the wetlands and started really using them. This is American widgeon. Ring-necked ducks moved in. Green-winged teal. And if folks who have Merlin or other things, if you go and have a listen to green-winged teal, they're very beautiful. They sound like little tin pipes. Bufflehead also showed up. I also began to see a lot of small fish, and those small fish attracted hungry hooded mergansers, as well as great blue heron who came in to hunt for the fish and the frogs. Belted kingfisher also came. They dove into the wetland and popped out with little fish in their bill. Red-winged blackbirds nested in the wetland for the first time, and this is a female red-winged blackbird carrying food for her nestlings. Nesting common yellowthroat numbers, as well as the marsh wren, those numbers increased a lot after the wetland was built. And this is a photo of a fledgling common yellowthroat. They look pretty different when they're young. So when this area was a hayfield, there were 5 wetland-related species that occurred there. 2 of them were confirmed nesting. By the second year after construction, there were 15 wetland-related birds with 5 that were nesting. So it was a real pleasure and a privilege to witness the birth of a wetland and to observe the changes in the species that benefited from it. It was just awesome. Thanks very much. Oh, I got to stop screen sharing. I've done something odd here. There we go.
No, I think it's all good, Ren.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you, Robin. I'd like to also echo that, we still have people living on the land at Cherry Meadows, where we did the restoration work years ago. And they also noted the same sorts of things, that all these bird species are moving back in. There's swans on the wetlands that reed canary grass was not swan habitat. And nesting sandhill cranes, and even they even noted that black-necked stilts showed up on the wetlands one spring, which is a SAR, a species at risk in British Columbia, red listed in British Columbia. So it's so nice to see that these projects from the Lower Mainland to the Kootenays are actually providing habitat for species at risk. And so everyone, hopefully that these presentations have shown you just how important the restoration work that the Nature Conservancy Canada has been conducting with specialists like Ren and Robin across BC can be, and you found some interesting takeaways. It's pretty interesting technical stuff, also combined with naturalist types, observations of these beautiful wetland species. So we're ready to start taking some questions for everyone in the audience. So please, we'll see if we have some things coming up. I think I'm going to get posted on the sidebar and see where that goes. I'm going to ask. Go ahead, Robin.
I was just going to say, while the questions are coming in, I want to share a little anecdote about this project that, Ren, obviously, as you saw, started monitoring and surveying before the restoration. And I remember at one point, Ren reaching out to me, Robin, I want to talk to you. Okay, so we get on the phone, and Ren says to me, Robin, I'm really kind of wasting NCC's money. I feel bad. I mean, I'm going out there into a hayfield looking for ducks, and there's no ducks in the hayfield. And I said, no, this is good. This is good, because it seems so obvious after the fact that this restoration is going to benefit the wildlife species, but just to go out there beforehand, I thought it was so fascinating hearing what you were saying, Ren, about the numbers of species before and after. That to go out before is something that we don't often get the opportunity to do. So that's what I think was so powerful about this particular project.
It was definitely, and I did feel A, sometimes a little bit bored, but B, yes, what am I doing here? But just to actually see and witness the changes before and after was really, really powerful for me. And I think it shares a good story as well for what happens when we actually create this habitat.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a good first question, actually. Robin, they thank you for your presentation. Are there any challenges from a regulatory perspective to complete wetland restoration projects? And I know from firsthand that there are many, but I'd like to see your...
You can answer that question too, Richard. Richard and I are navigating regulatory challenges on the Marion Creek project and with the rest of the team. Yes, it is a challenging regulatory environment, wetland restoration. So there's both provincial and federal legislation as well. There can be from the regional district, there can be regional district regulations as well as municipal regulations around, protecting watercourses, which of course is very important. We want watercourses, riparian areas, wetlands to be protected. And at the same time, we're in a situation in British Columbia where the legislation almost really assumes that if you're going into a stream or a wetted area to do anything, what you're intending to do is going to be harmful to the stream. Like maybe you're building a parking lot or putting in a driveway or heaven forbid, wanting to fill in a wetland. So what's happened in British Columbia is that the legislation around the protection of watercourses is really aimed at preventing habitat destruction. And we need in BC, we don't have it yet, but we need really a separate pathway, a restoration pathway that would allow us to present these projects to water authorizations and be able to get approvals in a timely way. One of the limiting factors around this work is it's seasonal. We have to work amongst the water, in this case at Chase Woods, the tides, or fire risk, bird nesting windows, fish windows. And so we're already constrained seasonally. We can be constrained sometimes by funding availability, funding cycles. And so the regulatory situation is very challenging, and it can cause significant project delays. And I'm really hopeful that British Columbia will create a pathway that will facilitate restoration, as opposed to, unfortunately, right now, I would say it impedes it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that good stuff. Ren, I have a question from you. So the wood ducks were obviously an interesting species. Were there any other species at risk that you thought were out of the ordinary that showed up at one of these at the Chase Woods site?
Well, I think the one that I was really surprised about was a plant, the beggar ticks, because I just had no idea about that plant prior to this work. And then when I sent it off to a botanist colleague of mine, and they were like, well, that's Vancouver Island beggar ticks. That's a species at risk. And there's a small population at Somenos Marsh. So that was a big surprise. In terms of bird species at risk, there weren't any real surprises, just a lot of pleasure. All of those, the herons coming in, the barn swallows, those numbers of barn swallows being able to feed prior to migration was just spectacular. They're also a species at risk. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. Like the red-legged frogs, obviously, too, was a real sweet thing to see.
That's great. Robin, I have another question for you, because I think this is something that we're all challenged with. So once we try to recreate these wetlands, we're trying to do it in a low maintenance way. Are these planned in such a way that there's not long-term sort of maintenance issues with our costs with, like, in the past, what were dams and stuff like that? Like, I think we're all striving towards a low maintenance, like basically hands-off perspective. Is that what you would agree with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, so the Chase Woods project, my mentor Tom Biebickhauser and I designed and built that project. And one of the things that I've learned from working with Tom is that there have been times in our history, in our time here in British Columbia, our settler time in British Columbia, that where there was a little bit of a notion of, we know better than nature. So we're going to dike these areas, we're going to install pumps, and we're going to control water levels and create nesting habitat for birds, this kind of thing. And the techniques that I've learned and that I use are really modeled on nature. So biomimicry, we're looking at how were wetlands historically, we know there were so many on the landscape historically, they were not surrounded by dikes, they were not filled with pumps. So we strive to design and build naturally functioning wetlands that maintain their hydro period, or the amount of time that water's in the wetland, through just natural ecosystem processes on the land, which means that we don't have those costs. Well, first of all, if you're maintaining and manipulating the water level using pumps, then of course you've got the cost of fuel, you've got to maintain access to bring fuel or electricity. So it can be very, very costly to maintain wetland structures like that require a lot of maintenance. And not to say that these projects that we design are completely maintenance free, because certainly, especially when there's a history of agricultural use, the agronomic species, the green canary grass, other species that are grown for hay, European grasses are very aggressive. And so it can be very difficult, or, you can sort of need to nudge it along to get trending towards more native species. But certainly on the hydrological side, as far as the amount of water, how long the water stays there, we really strive to make it modeled on the way that wetlands and streams were shaped by glaciers, so that they don't need maintaining.
Okay, I have one more question, but we have to move to wrap up. And it is a multiple question in the chat, and I think we're all going to have to deal with this in the future. Robin, what do you think is our best measure at preventing reed canary grass from either reestablishing on these wetland restoration sites or somehow to mitigate it in the future?
Well, the reed canary that is on these wetland sites did not appear on its own, and it did not appear overnight. I actually found a book. You can look for this book, okay? It's called Grass Beyond the Mountains. It is a book about ranching. And in that book, they describe very clearly how you turn a wetland, natural complex wetland that provides habitat for all these species, into a reed canary field. And it's a multi-step process. It involves draining the wetland, it involves burning it, grazing it, successively converting it to this reed canary field. So we can't, I think one of the things that we are guilty of culturally is a kind of impatience around things. We want it like that. And it just as it took time to convert these very complex systems into reed canary fields, it's going to take time going in the other direction. I tend not to be a purist about it. I aim for reducing the extent of non-native species, for increasing the biodiversity. And, we have a number of techniques that we use with reed canary. One of them you saw in my presentation, we literally stripped the reed canary with a bulldozer. Now, we had used the same technique on a large wetland project for Nature Trust in the Kootenay, in the floodplain of the Kootenay, worked perfectly. At Chase Woods, not so perfectly. The reed canary really came back. So it's tempting to think, oh, there's this one technique you use and it's going to work. And sites are very different, and the moisture regimes, what goes on is very different at each site. And I think it does require some ongoing maintenance, and it also requires being really clear about what your objectives are, what your targets are. You can have a whole number of species at risk, and you can have some reed canary. And is that okay? These are some questions that we need to ask ourselves and figure out where do we want to take this?
True. Yeah. And I've noticed too, in our Cherry Meadows property, some areas we went a little further down to the gravels, and we've had a whole new plant succession come back that's covered. It's not invasives and it's not reed canary grass. So I think there's a variety of techniques to employ. We have to kind of wrap it up, but I noticed also somebody pointed out some questions about maintenance and monitoring. And I would say that on all the Nature Conservancy of Canada projects, we have an ecosystem restoration framework, and it involves long-term post-monitoring of all these sites and wetland health assessments. We draw on a variety of sources, everything from cows and fish to all sorts of new innovative other wetland monitoring projects. So they are monitored. We want to make sure that invasive species don't show back up or they're not very well functioning. So I just wanted to add that, but we do have to kind of move on. And I would like to point out that we're going to talk a little further about some other Nature Talk stuff. And I'd like to thank Robin and Ren for being here tonight. And I really appreciate everything. And I know that many of you that are viewing tonight have made generous gifts to the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and we really appreciate that, because a lot of this work is very time consuming and cost prohibitive, but we really are trying to make a difference to what's going on in Canada. And none of this would be possible without your support. So I also wanted to note out that as we approach the end of 2023, the gift season is upon us. The gift giving season is upon us. And I encourage you to consider making your donation on Giving Tuesday, because we're gonna point out a little video about some really important match funding that could be possible to make more projects like this possible. The Global Day of Philanthropy is coming up on November 28th. We are honored to have the Colin Stevens Family Foundation on board as our partner match in British Columbia. And that means that that foundation is going to contribute double other dollars. For every dollar that's donated, they'll double it. So that's pretty amazing, and we really appreciate that. And we have a short video from the Al Collins and Hillary Stevens, who created their family foundation to foster an ethic of giving back in their kids, their grandkids, and their community. And here's how they describe it.
I'm Hillary Stevens.
I'm Alan Collings, and we're the founders of the Collings-Stevens Family Foundation, and we're big supporters of Nature Conservancy of Canada.
Our hope for the future is that instead of 2% going to nature, as far as charitable contributions are concerned, that the number is way higher, and that we can inspire other people to also give to nature.
We really want to encourage people to donate to Nature Conservancy of Canada on Giving Tuesday, November 28th, when our foundation, the Collings-Stevens Family Foundation, will match your donation so that you can double your contribution to preservation of nature.
And thanks everyone. That's a very charitable gift that Family Foundation has provided. So this wraps up our time together tonight. I've really appreciated it. I've learned lots from Ren and Robin. Just so everybody knows, we've recorded this webinar and our team will be sending you the link. So feel free to share with anyone that you think would enjoy some information on wetlands and wetland restoration. It was pretty informative. I hope you're coming away with some hopeful and inspiration that there's much more to do, that we can help nature heal and thrive particularly around wetlands. And so there's so much more to do. So on behalf of the Nature Conservancy of Canada and Ren and Robin, I really want to thank you for joining us here tonight and wish you the very best of your evening, and good night.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.